Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. You've probably seen a guy like me before. Soaked jacket, reflective pack, weaving through traffic with earbuds in and one hand gripping the brake. I was one of thousands. Just another blur on two wheels carving through Manhattan's after-hours arteries. Name's Marco Alvarez. 26, lived above a laundromat on East 3rd and Avenue B, 5th floor walk-up that always smelled like detergent and hot grease. I delivered food, all kinds, all hours. Sometimes groceries, sometimes pills, sometimes just silence to people who didn't want to be alone with it. Didn't matter if it was for DoorDash, Uber Eats, Caviar, or one of those sketchier apps that paid in prepaid cards. If you ordered between dusk and 2 a.m., chances are I was the one buzzing your building and jogging up 5 flights because the elevator was broken. I didn't see myself as part of the city. Not really. More like a nerve impulse. One that moved fast, cut corners, dodged cabs, and never stopped long enough to belong. I knew every shortcut, every alley, every backdoor kitchen in Midtown. Knew which buildings tipped in cash and which ones tried to pretend you didn't exist. But that night was the kind that made the city feel like it was waiting for something. A Thursday in late September. Warm but wet, like the air couldn't decide whether to sweat or rain. Not a storm exactly. Just that low, humid drizzle that turns asphalt into oil slick and every neon reflection into something twice as lonely. The streets had that half-empty hum. Not dead, just muted. You saw bartenders unlocking metal gates, dog walkers lighting up cheap cigarettes under scaffolding, delivery guys like me wiping rain from their faces with sleeves already soaked through. At around 8:40, I accepted a pickup from a noodle shop on Bowery, Xi'an Famous Foods, the one near Grand Street. The order was a double, one delivery going to a high-rise on Pearl Street near the seaport, the other to a third-floor walk-up on Elizabeth just past Kenmare. The restaurant was already crowded with other riders waiting, most of them in soaked rain gear. I knew a few by face, nodded at a guy named Koji I'd seen around the East Village. He didn't smile back, just looked at the street like he was listening for something. We all knew something was weird that week. The city had been humming differently. Emergency broadcasts had interrupted the radio a few times. Subreddits were full of wild stuff, people talking about CDC vans in Midtown, whole neighborhoods in Jersey going dark, and some kind of lockdown drill at JFK that nobody could explain. But nothing official, just that bland government tone. Please remain calm, maintain awareness, trust official sources. That night, while I waited for the order, I saw 3 unmarked NYPD cruisers rip down the street. Lights off, high speed, windshield wipers going like mad. They didn't stop for the red light at Delancey. Almost hit a bus. Something about the way they moved. It wasn't routine. It was flight. Retreat. I got the order and packed it in the thermal bag, clipped the bag to my rear rack, pulled the hood of my rain shell tight. My route was south down Bowery to Pearl Street, dropped the first bag, then loop west to Elizabeth. I didn't think twice about it. I'd done that loop maybe 100 times. About halfway down Bowery, I saw a guy stumbling through the middle of the crosswalk at Canal. People honked at him, but he didn't react. I slowed down just enough to see his hands, filthy, fingers broken at weird angles. His clothes looked like he'd rolled through a junkyard, and he moved like something inside him wasn't wired right. A woman in a black coat crossed herself as she passed him. No one stopped. I made the drop on Pearl Street without issue. Guy tipped in cash, handed me a folded 5 with shaking hands, and didn't meet my eyes. His apartment was on the 28th floor. When I stepped back into the elevator, I saw what he was watching on the TV in the living room, a live newsfeed of police in hazmat suits sealing off a hospital entrance in Newark. There were bodies in the parking lot, covered in those blue tarps the fire department uses at disaster scenes. The elevator was dead quiet. By the time I reached Elizabeth Street for the second drop, the whole block felt lighter, empty, like sound was being swallowed. There was a bag lady on the corner just watching the sky, not moving, just staring, like she was trying to count the clouds. The apartment building was one of those 3-story red brick things with busted buzzers and mail crammed in the slots. I knocked on the second door, 3rd floor. No answer. Knocked again. Still nothing. I tried calling the number on the order, but it rang once and dropped. Not even voicemail. Then I noticed something in the stairwell. Brown streaks on the wall. Dried. Old enough to crust. Fresh enough to stink. I backed out and left the food on the doorstep. Didn't even snap a photo for proof. It felt wrong to hang around, like the building had stopped being part of the city and become a shell. I took Christie north back toward Houston. That's when I saw the crowd. Not a protest, not a party, just people standing in the middle of the street near Sarah D. Roosevelt Park, like they'd spilled out from somewhere in a hurry. Some had shopping bags. One guy had no shoes. A woman had a baby stroller but no baby inside. Everyone faced the same direction, east. At the front of the group was an MTA bus with all its lights off, driver's side door flung wide. I rolled closer, maybe 50 feet off. Someone in the crowd said, "It was full," then stopped talking. Nobody moved toward it. I rode wide around the block. There was a smell hanging over the intersection, like meat left out in the sun, mixed with something wet and bitter. I didn't want to find out what it was. Back at my apartment, the power was out. No hallway lights, no fridge hum. The laundromat downstairs had the gate rolled down and padlocked. I walked up the 5 flights in the dark, lit by the flashlight on my phone. My door was untouched. I bolted it, triple locked it, shoved my dresser in front just because. I ate the leftover food from the cancelled drop. Cold noodles. Couldn't taste a thing. Around 11:15, the sky flashed like lightning, but there was no thunder. Just a low pulse that came from the west, like someone had flipped a massive breaker underground. My phone buzzed once, wireless emergency alert. All it said was, "Stay inside. Await further instruction. Do not approach infected individuals." It was the first time the word infected had appeared anywhere official. I turned off my phone after that, not because I didn't want to know more, but because I didn't want it to ring with news I couldn't unhear. That night I barely slept. The street below was dead quiet, but every now and then I'd hear a footstep that didn't belong, a cough that didn't sound normal, a knock on a door 2 floors down, followed by silence. Just one knock, not repeated, not urgent, just a single knock, like a test. I stayed on the floor with a kitchen knife and the fire extinguisher from the hallway. Every creak in the building sounded louder than it should have. The building had always been full of noise. Neighbors yelling, TVs blaring, dogs barking. But that night, it was just wood settling and things moving that weren't supposed to move. I counted those creaks without realizing it, counted the gaps between sounds, counted the breaths between moments where something might happen. By the time the first grey light pushed through the blinds, I hadn't closed my eyes once. The city outside didn't look right. The glow of sunrise was muted, flat, like it was shining through dirty glass. There were no birds. That's what struck me first. Usually by 6 in the morning, you'd hear gulls from the river, pigeons flapping along the eaves, the occasional starling warbling from a fire escape. That morning, nothing. Just wind shifting trash down the street, paper brushing pavement. I moved slowly around the apartment, didn't open the window, just peeked through the blinds. My bike was still chained to the street lamp. Nobody had touched it, but the white delivery box on the back had a long scratch across the lid, not like it was dropped, more like someone had dragged a coin or a key across it. A thin, deliberate mark. I kept the knife in my waistband and the extinguisher in hand as I cleaned out what was left in my fridge. Half a bottle of ginger beer, 3 boiled eggs, a bag of sliced turkey turning grey at the edges, and a shriveled lime. I ate 2 of the eggs, poured the rest of the ginger beer into a plastic bottle, and dumped the rest. The fridge was already losing its chill. At 7:30, I stepped into the hallway. No lights, no hum from the building systems. I listened at each door. Unit 5B, the one across from mine, usually had a teenage couple who fought constantly. I'd never heard them not yelling. Now, just silence. I knocked once. Gentle, not stupid. No answer, no movement. The peephole on their door had a crack running through it like it had been punched. I didn't check the other units. I wasn't playing rescuer. I was trying to stay alive. And I knew that the longer I waited up there, the more I'd run out of things I could control. At street level, the air had a strange taste to it. Something between burned rubber and sour sweat. The kind of smell you'd catch near industrial plants, but with something off. My phone, which I'd turned back on briefly, had no signal. No Wi-Fi either. I couldn't even get a weather update, let alone news. The city wasn't dead. It was just muffled, like the volume had been turned way down. Cars were parked crooked at the curb. One MTA bus sat in the middle of the avenue, rear doors open. I walked past it on the far side of the street. The inside was empty except for a backpack on the driver's seat. Its contents, water bottle, Metro card, a book of crossword puzzles, were scattered along the aisle. No blood, no broken windows. But something about the interior looked frozen, like someone had been mid-thought and then simply vanished. I reached my bike and unlocked it. The scratch on the box lid was deeper than I'd realized. Not a coin, not a key, something sharper. I checked the tires, squeezed the brakes, kicked twice on the pedal to test rotation. All good, for now. I started heading west, toward Broadway. My plan, if you could even call it that, was to reach a friend's place in Hell's Kitchen. Jake, EMT, worked nights. Level-headed, had food, backup radio, some security cameras. Lived in a basement unit with barred windows. We'd joked a few times it'd be the perfect place to hide out during a blackout. I figured if anyone would know what was happening, it'd be him. Along the way, I passed 3 broken storefronts. Not shattered, just forced open. A bodega with its door hanging sideways, cereal spilled in the doorway. A nail salon with the chairs overturned. A vape shop that looked like someone had taken everything and just walked out. But what hit hardest were the shoes. Pairs of them, just sitting in the middle of the sidewalk, like people had stepped out of them and disappeared. Loafers, sneakers, a pair of child's pink sandals, glitter flaking off. Some had dried stains in the soles. One pair was arranged neatly beside a shattered phone. At 14th Street and University Place, I saw my first one. He was leaning against a mail drop box. Looked like any old homeless man from a distance. Thin, hunched, still. But as I slowed, I noticed something wrong. His chest wasn't moving. His mouth was slightly open, lips dark and dry. And his eyes were open, fixed on the same spot. Pupils dilated wide, even in daylight. He didn't blink. I thought he might be dead, but I didn't stop to check. As I passed, maybe 15 feet off, he turned his head. Not like a living person, not curious, more like a sensor catching heat. He started to move, slow, deliberate, like a man waking from surgery, not sleep. His hands dragged along the edge of the box. His fingers flexed once, then curled. He didn't call out, didn't chase, just followed. I pushed harder on the pedals, zigzagged through some trash bins, cut through a half-block construction zone. When I looked back, he was still moving, but not with purpose. More like instinct. Slow, stumbling, but wrong. Everything in me knew that whatever had taken his body wasn't him anymore. By the time I reached Times Square, the situation was clearer. Not just one or two. Dozens, moving in loose groups, some wandering alone, some slumped over subway grates. A few pressed against the glass of storefronts, faces smearing the windows, not reacting to anything but sudden movement. There were bodies too. Not many, but enough. Piled near the TKTS steps, some slumped in the pedestrian zone like they'd dropped mid-walk. No blood at first glance. No injuries that made sense. Just stopped. A few had wounds, bites. That's what I noticed after squinting. Chunks of flesh missing from shoulders, arms, sides of faces. One man had no fingers left, just exposed hand bones, like he'd tried to shield himself. I didn't stop, didn't take pictures. I moved like I was invisible, or hoped I was. At 9th Avenue and 47th, Jake's building was locked. The steel grate was halfway down. The buzzer had no power. I knocked once, then again, then harder. I called out, not yelling, just enough that if he were inside, he'd hear. No reply. I moved down the alley. There was a back entrance, a basement stairwell that led to his window. I crouched and looked in. Nothing moved. Then something did. Not Jake, not human. A figure in a yellow EMT vest was hunched over something. It lifted its head. The lower jaw was missing. Just gone. The thing still made noise. A low, wet clicking sound. Its hands were planted on what remained of a body. Jake's ID badge was on the floor beside it. I stepped back. Slow. Didn't run. Just moved back toward the alley entrance, eyes on the door. That's when another one rounded the corner. A woman in business clothes. One shoe, no left arm. She walked into the alley like she'd been searching for the smell of thought. I had no choice. I ran. No time to unlock the bike. I'd leaned against the post. I took off on foot, straight up toward 53rd, cut through the theatre district, ducked into a loading bay behind a shuttered bistro, and crouched beside a bin full of soaked cardboard. My breath was shallow, my ears strained for movement. I waited 10 minutes before the alleys were quiet again. When I finally stepped back out, the street had that glassy kind of stillness that doesn't last long. I spotted a city bike dock a block away. Half the racks were empty, but one had a functioning bike with the chain still tight and the tires full. I didn't even bother checking the app. Just yanked it loose with a hard jolt and hopped on. My calves screamed after all the running, but pedaling felt like control. That hum of gears and the click of the pedals was the first thing that felt normal in hours. I headed south to the only place I thought I could still find answers, Bellevue Hospital. The streets weren't empty, just drained. All the familiar movement, the sidewalk flow, the yellow cab ballet, the delivery vans pulling halfway into lanes, was gone. Everything felt stalled in mid-motion. Cars had been left wherever the drivers panicked. Some doors stood open. A UPS truck sat at an angle in the middle of 5th Avenue, engine still idling, wipers slowly streaking across a windshield streaked with handprints. The back door flapped with each gust of wind. Inside, crates lay cracked open, tape fluttering, nothing of value left. No sign of the driver. As I rode, I avoided direct lines of sight, kept to narrow lanes, service alleys, anywhere the buildings could block me from view. The infected didn't move fast, but they were drawn to sound. Not a full sprint, not even a walk. Just that dragging, tumbling pace like their feet had forgotten how to lift and their bodies moved by memory alone. But sudden motion snapped them into awareness. You could feel them pivoting as one, pulled towards sound like a weather vane turning toward the storm. By the time I passed Koreatown, I'd started to notice a pattern in the way they clustered. They didn't just wander aimlessly. They gravitated toward intersections, near subway entrances and bus shelters. It was like they hovered around old routines, stuck in echo loops. I didn't know if it was neurological or just muscle memory, but I knew it meant they could still trap you. They didn't need to sprint if you walked into them by mistake. At 31st Street, I passed a patrol car wedged at an angle between a trash truck and a bent parking meter. The back windows were smeared with something thick and old. The front windshield had a handprint stretched wide across it. 5 thick streaks of dried brown spread out like fingers had exploded against the glass. I didn't stop. I didn't look closer. That kind of curiosity gets you pulled into a place you don't walk away from. Around 1st Avenue and 28th, I left the bike behind. Too exposed. The closer I got to Bellevue, the heavier the air felt. Not metaphorical. Actual weight. A chemical burn in the nose. The faint taste of copper. Bellevue loomed against the sky like a dead ship run aground in the middle of Manhattan. I'd always thought of it that way. Too old to die. Too stubborn to collapse. But that day, it had the posture of something already grieving. I crept through the parking lot. The main entrance had been barricaded with plastic patient beds and steel filing cabinets turned sideways. Trash and paperwork fluttered through the metal grates. I didn't try the front. I knew hospitals. I delivered to them plenty of times. Knew the back entrances, the staff docks, the smokers' exits near the laundry services. I made for the west side loading dock. Halfway across the lot, I heard them. The sound was distinct, not breathing, more like the absence of it. The shuffling scrape of skin over pavement. A single cough. Dry, broken, not deliberate. A reflex trapped in something no longer alive. I ducked behind one car and slowly peered through the shattered back window. 3 of them, one in blue scrubs, now blackened with dried fluid. One in what looked like a hospital gown, with an open back, spinal ridge exposed. The third wore cargo pants and a soaked t-shirt, mouth hanging open like he'd been screaming before the change and never closed it again. They were slow, but they were turning. I'd been seen. I scanned for anything, any weapon, any edge. There was nothing in reach but a trash bin and a tilted security kiosk at the edge of the lot. I made a break for it. The three turned fully now, moving with that awful pendulum gait, arms half raised like they were navigating by sonar. Inside the kiosk, the air was rank, but unoccupied. It had already been ransacked. A half-empty coffee cup rested on a cracked monitor, but behind the counter, I found it. A riot control shield. One of those clear polycarbonate plates with police stenciled in block white. Lightweight, tall enough to cover my torso. Next to it, leaning against the wall, a rusted metal rod, maybe 3 feet long. Not a baton, more like a rod for locking overhead doors. One end was flat, the other had a jagged groove where it had snapped. It'd do. I wrapped my hand in a rag before gripping it, lifted the shield with my left arm. It was lighter than it looked, with the grip molded to fit comfortably under my elbow. The strap cinched tight against my forearm. I stepped out and let the infected see me. No hesitation now. They moved toward me with dull purpose, arms twitching, hands stiff like dead tree branches. The one in scrubs reached first. I raised the shield, angled low, and let him hit it. The impact was nothing. He bounced off and reeled back, and I drove the rod forward. Not a stab, but a forward push into the eye socket. It slid in with resistance, like pushing through wet leather. He dropped. The second lunged, mouth open, teeth broken and yellowed. I used the shield edge to shove her back into the hood of a nearby car, then jabbed upward with the rod into the underside of the jaw. The crack was audible, like ice splitting in a glass. She collapsed against the car and slid down. The third didn't pause, just kept coming. I let him strike the shield head on and used the momentum to pivot. He staggered forward, off balance. I circled and knocked his legs out from under him with a sweep of the rod. When he fell, he hit hard and didn't get back up. No blood touched me. Not a drop. The shield kept them off. The rod did the work. I backed away slowly, breathing through my nose. I didn't feel like a killer. I felt like someone who'd just patched a leak. It wasn't emotion. It was maintenance. After that, I moved faster. I reached the ambulance bay. One vehicle had crashed through the inner gates and was halfway embedded in a collapsed wall. The emergency light still flickered faintly. Beyond it, the loading dock was open. Stretchers were scattered like afterthoughts, IV bags trailing tubes in the breeze. I stepped over the threshold and into Bellevue. The front entrance was barricaded, not with tape, with actual debris. Hospital beds overturned, folding chairs, security desks dragged from inside. It wasn't a professional block. It was made in a panic. Not to keep people out, but to keep something in. That hospital usually roared with life. Every time I delivered there, late-night orders for nurses or someone grabbing noodles on their break, it was a mess of sound. Machines, beeps, pagers, radios. Now it felt like a crypt. I passed 3 bodies in the corridor to the OR wing. None moved. All had bites. One looked like he'd been a resident, still in green scrubs, face down with a surgical mask dangling from one ear. His ankle had been torn wide open. No blood trail. No fight. Just dropped. Near the pediatric unit, I finally saw motion. A figure ahead. Clean clothes, not dragging. A man in scrubs, maybe mid-30s. He held a clipboard, eyes wide, walking fast but not running. I raised my hand and said something. I don't remember what. He froze. We stared at each other for a second, and then he shook his head. No, you don't want to be here. I followed him anyway. He didn't stop me, but he didn't wait. We ducked through an emergency stairwell, moved 4 flights up, then into a sealed-off wing. He opened the door with a keycard. It still had power. A red light flashed green, and we were inside. The room was a repurposed conference suite, 20 or so people inside, some in white coats, others in street clothes. All alert, not panicked, focused. Someone looked me over with a flashlight. A woman asked, "Were you bit?" I said no. She made me take off my jacket, checked my arms, wrist, neck, then waved me in. I stayed in that room for 3 hours. They weren't CDC, not police, just staff. Doctors, nurses, maybe some hospital admin. They'd barricaded the top floor 2 days earlier when the ER was overrun. From what I understood, the infection hadn't started in Bellevue, but patients from other hospitals had been brought there once things got out of hand in Queens and parts of Jersey. They said something about a failed quarantine at Jamaica Hospital, another at Newark Beth Israel. One doctor, an older man with a Russian accent, explained it like this. The virus didn't kill instantly. People got feverish, disoriented, stopped responding. Some died and came back. Some never died. They just changed. The ones that reanimated, they were slower, decayed. The ones who never died seemed more reactive, but also deteriorated with time. He wasn't sure if it was viral or something else. Just called it systemic collapse. He said something had been seen in MRI scans, damage to brain tissue, specific regions tied to impulse control and spatial awareness. But there wasn't enough data. The most chilling part, they had no name for it, no classification, no acronym, no fancy terminology. That scared me more than anything. It meant the professionals didn't even have a box to put it in. At around 2 p.m., someone burst into the room, a young nurse, out of breath, covered in something that looked like bile. She'd gone to the pharmacy on the 3rd floor with another guy. He hadn't come back. She made it halfway up before something followed her. The decision to leave came fast. The doctor looked around the room and said, "We will not wait for them to come through that door." They had a route, through the adjacent office tower connected by Skybridge, down to street level, then across to the FDR underpass where they believed some National Guard vehicles had last been seen parked the night before. I didn't argue. I didn't say goodbye. I left Bellevue with them, through the bridge, silent as a funeral procession. Below us, the street was smeared with something dark. A taxi had crashed through a bike rack. No driver, just a door swinging in the breeze. We lost 2 on the way down. One man fell behind during a stairwell descent and never caught up. Another got caught in a rotating glass door when something came up from behind. We kept going. No one turned back. By the time we reached the FDR, the vehicles were gone. The barricades were still there. Metal gates, sandbags, empty ammo boxes. But the soldiers had left or been taken. The doctor looked over the railing toward the East River. His face didn't show sadness, just calculation. One woman from the group, a lab tech I think, said there was a ferry dock not far. Said it had been shut down since the previous day, but there was a chance something was still there. We moved fast, clinging to shadows, weaving between wrecked traffic. Smoke rose from somewhere near the UN building. The ferry dock was intact, but the boats were gone. All of them. Just a single life raft deflated on the pier, oars floating loose in the water. That's when we scattered. The group split, some wanting to try toward Brooklyn, others north toward Harlem. I couldn't follow them all. I turned back toward Midtown, toward places I knew better. Familiar territory meant better odds. I thought about heading to my cousin's place in Spanish Harlem, or maybe west, back toward the tunnels. I didn't know. All I knew was I wasn't ready to die in the middle of a conversation. I headed west through Lower East Side ruins and kept low behind mail trucks and parked sedans, the bike creaking beneath me. The sun was low, orange bleeding across the windows of buildings that had lost all their color. I wasn't sure where I was going. I just knew I had to keep moving. My legs ached. I'd been running or riding or crouched in tight spaces since the night before, and it was starting to show in every turn of the crank. Every red light was a checkpoint. Every alleyway a trap. I knew the neighborhoods, Hell's Kitchen to Hudson Yards, then east toward the Flatiron if I could, but the streets weren't behaving the same anymore. The paths I'd taken 100 times were now cut off by piled wreckage, abandoned trucks, or worse, shadows I couldn't trust. I ditched my bike at 10th and 31st, behind a row of dumpsters near a boarded-up pizza shop. The tires were soft by then, and the chain had started grinding like gravel. My knees were shaking, but I didn't stop. There were too many windows staring down from empty buildings. Too many places where something could be watching and not even need to blink. At one point I passed a man sitting perfectly still in the driver's seat of a Range Rover. His head was tilted back like he was sleeping. I slowed, looked closer. His throat was gone, just an open flap of dark. But his hands still gripped the steering wheel, and his foot pressed the brake hard enough that the rear lights were still on, pulsing red against the walls of a nearby hotel. By the time I reached 8th Avenue, the real shape of the city started to show. The surface chaos was just the first layer. Underneath was the truth. The infected weren't everywhere, but they didn't need to be. They moved in slow patterns, echoing some memory of routine. I saw a woman in a grey coat try to follow a city bus that was no longer there, arms reaching out like she remembered what it smelled like inside. Another man stood under an awning that still had the remnants of a transit map. He stared at it with his lips moving, as if reciting the stops. That made them worse. They weren't frantic. They weren't growling or foaming, or flailing around like bad movie creatures. They were calm, patient, like they had all the time in the world to find you. I kept north until I reached a row of scaffolding near Penn Station. Someone had tried to set up a barricade there. Barricade in the loosest sense. Construction panels leaned together with caution tape and crushed chairs piled behind. It had been a checkpoint maybe, or just a last-ditch effort by some desperate workers to close off the entrance to the tunnel system. And then came the scream. Not close, but loud enough that every bird that had come back for the evening liftoff scattered. A woman's voice, maybe 2 blocks east. One long wail, torn into pieces by either pain or distance. I ducked into the scaffolding, kept my body low, eyes on the street lines. Nothing came running, but something changed in the wind after that. Like the noise had cracked whatever still held this part of Manhattan in stasis. I heard feet dragging, not boots, not sneakers, just the scuff of flesh on pavement. 2 came around the corner, both male, both tall. One had no shoes, just blackened feet and one trouser leg torn off at the knee. The other was wearing a raincoat and nothing beneath it. They didn't speak, didn't groan, just turned in tandem like twin antennae searching for signal. I stepped back behind a dumpster, keeping my breathing through my nose. That's when I noticed the third one, crouched behind a cab. Close, closer than it should have been. I hadn't seen it when I passed seconds before. It was crouched, not standing, almost folded in on itself. Its head rested against the tire like it had been waiting for something. Then it moved. Not fast, not slow, just direct. It rose onto its feet without shifting weight. It didn't brace or adjust, just unfurled and turned its face toward me. The eyes were white at the edges, the rest, blood-soaked yellow. One nostril had collapsed inward. Its lips were dry and cracked, and curled in a grin that didn't know why it was smiling. I stepped back without thinking, and hit a metal pipe with the handle of my pack. The sound was tiny, barely more than a tap, but it was enough. All 3 turned, and they didn't stop. I ran. No thought, no planning. Just bolted straight up the sidewalk and vaulted over a parking meter. My bag tore loose and spilled something. A water bottle or one of the ration bars I'd found near the ferry dock earlier. I didn't stop to see. Just pushed through a side alley between 2 banks and crashed through a pile of laundry bins someone had left to rot. Up ahead, a subway entrance stood cracked open, not sealed, no gate, just shadow. I knew it was a death trap, but I also knew the infected hadn't followed me down into tight spaces before. At least not yet. I slipped into the stairwell and didn't breathe until I dropped 2 levels below the street. The stench was worse down there. Mold and rot and something chemical, like industrial cleaner poured over a carcass. The tile walls sweated moisture. The tiles beneath my feet were cracked, pooled with murky water, but no signs of movement. No rats, no people, no echoes. I found a side hallway, one of those utility tunnels marked "Employees Only." The door wasn't locked, just wedged shut with a mop handle someone had jammed through the loop. I cracked it open and slipped inside. Darkness swallowed everything. No emergency lights. No motion sensors. I turned on the flashlight app on my phone and kept it dim, using it only when absolutely necessary. The hallway curved and dropped in elevation, probably leading to the substation or janitorial quarters. maybe even connecting tunnels between stations. I'd heard rumors that old service corridors beneath Midtown connected all the way to Grand Central. I found a small maintenance room and shut myself inside. There was a single chair, half of a plastic table, and a metal box that used to hold gloves. I wedged myself behind the table and let the door rest mostly shut. I stayed there for 5 hours, listened, slept in increments too short to measure. When I woke, if you could call it that, the hallway was still quiet. I had no sense of time anymore. My phone's battery had dropped to 12%, and I refused to waste it checking the clock. Eventually, I moved again, crawled out and followed the tunnel north until I hit a vertical shaft with a fixed ladder. I climbed it. Every rung felt like a signal flare. If something was above, it would hear, but I had no choice. At the top, I found a street-level grate. It was locked from the outside. A deadbolt drilled through the frame. No way out. I stayed there for another hour, then went back down. On the way down, I found a body in the corner. Maintenance worker. Badge said, Thomas McCabe. No sign of trauma. Just curled up like he'd gone to sleep. A small notebook lay beside him. Inside were 24 pages, all handwritten, all notes, observations, lists of names, numbers, drawings of teeth, jaw shapes. One entry read, some respond to fire, some don't. Another page just said, they don't all rot the same way. There's more to this. That was the first time I thought this might go beyond infection, beyond virus or biology. Not supernatural, but layered, complex, maybe engineered, maybe not, but something more than fever and bite marks. I took the notebook and kept moving. Another shaft led east toward Grand Central. I followed it. The further I went, the louder the city became above me. By the time I reached the station's underbelly, I could hear shouting. Real voices, not screams, not moans. Words and gunfire. Controlled bursts, 3-shot sequences. Then silence, then more. I crept up another stairwell and emerged in a maintenance room beneath the shuttle line. The grate above was open. Someone had forced it and left it hanging loose. I moved up through it and into the bowels of Grand Central. There were people, not many, but enough. Militia types, not military, no uniforms. One wore a Mets cap, the other a puffer jacket with duct tape over one sleeve. They were armed. One had a pistol, the other a short-barrel shotgun. Both dirty, both with that hollow-eyed awareness of people who knew the rules had changed permanently. They didn't ask questions, didn't shout. One of them just pointed toward the south side of the platform where a steel gate had been half lifted, revealing a narrow passage lit by flashlights zip-tied to conduit lines. I followed. The air grew thicker with every step, like the tunnels themselves were breathing. The silence had weight, not absence, broken only by the occasional squeak of damp shoes on tile or the shifting of fabric against skin. We passed rows of old lockers, rusted benches, defunct vending machines that had been cracked open for parts or used as barricades. A faded poster on the wall advertised Metro North schedules for a world that didn't exist anymore. Next to it, someone had scrawled in black permanent marker, no more trains, only tracks now. The platform curved gently. I saw people gathered near what used to be a service tunnel. Men and women, most wearing layers of mismatched clothing, faces sunburned or smeared with soot. A few kids huddled beneath blankets. Every person I passed watched me without speaking. They'd stopped being curious. Now, they measured people, evaluated them for risk or value. I felt their eyes follow me even after I stepped past. The back of the tunnel opened into an old MTA utility zone. Concrete floors, metal shelves, a water pump station long since shut down. The group had built it out. Generator in one corner, small, humming faintly. A bank of floodlights hung from the ceiling, some functional, most cracked. The smell of sweat, gasoline, and canned food hung in the air. It was a shelter, not a camp. No one laughed. No one played music. They weren't living. They were hiding. A tall man with a grey beard and broken glasses walked up to me. He didn't offer his name, just asked, "You bitten?" I said no. He studied my face, then pointed to the wall. "Sit there. Don't move. Don't talk unless it's important." I nodded. He walked away without waiting for more. So I sat, leaned against cool stone and listened. From what I gathered over the next hour, this group had been down here since the third day. They'd started with 23 people. Now there were 14. No doctors. 2 people with paramedic experience. No leadership. Just one man who knew how to reroute power from old transit panels, and another who'd worked MTA maintenance back in the 2000s. They kept track of things on a dry erase board: names, days, food inventory, notes about movement above ground. At some point they'd tried to broadcast on a handheld radio, but stopped after someone on the other end kept repeating the same phrase: "Do not leave the station. Do not leave the station." Over and over. The voice never identified itself. Then it cut to static and never came back. I ate half a protein bar I had in my jacket, shared the other half with a woman sitting beside a shopping cart full of batteries and broken flashlights. She didn't say thanks, just nodded once, like it was a trade, a way of saying I wasn't taking more than I gave. Night, or what passed for it underground, came without warning. The lights dimmed to preserve the generator. People settled into corners, or pallet beds built from scrap. No one spoke, just silence layered with soft shifts and breathing. But I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about the things I'd seen above. Those infected that moved like memories. Those who watched the air for something only they could sense. I thought about the crouched one, the quiet ones. Thought about the doctor who said, "Some respond to fire, some don't." That night, one of the infected reached the tunnels. We heard it before we saw it. A dragging sound against tile. Not heavy, not fast. Just slow and steady, like someone crawling with broken elbows. Someone shined a flashlight toward the main shaft. Nothing. Then something rolled. An empty can, knocked loose by movement. Everyone froze. No one reached for weapons. Not yet. They waited. A minute passed. Then another. Then came the breathing. Not human, not deep, but audible. Like the rasp of air passing over dry lungs that didn't know how to exhale. A man near the platform grabbed a pipe wrench and stepped forward. The man with the shotgun from earlier pointed toward the upper exit and nodded. "Watch the mouth of the stairwell. If it gets past us, they'll come in packs." The infected one appeared in the light. It was a boy, no older than 15, wearing a school jacket. Face caved in on one side. Legs bent wrong, like he'd fallen down something hard. He didn't look at anyone directly, just swayed slightly on his knees, then let out a sound. Soft, not a scream. More like a whisper caught in wind. The people didn't shoot. They didn't need to. One of them stepped forward, a woman in a denim coat with a railroad nail strapped to her forearm like a blade. She circled behind the thing and drove it into the back of the skull in one clean motion. The boy's body dropped without drama. No spasm, no resistance. Just a sack of flesh emptied of whatever had animated it. She dragged him back into the dark and came back alone. No one asked questions. I didn't sleep that night either. By morning, if that's what it was, they decided to move. The generators were dying. Fuel was almost gone. No more batteries. No more medicine. The infected were finding the tunnels now. Someone had to have left a scent trail, or maybe sound had carried too far through the old ventilation lines. The group broke up in two. Half went east toward the tunnel network under 42nd, hoping to reach the East River. The rest wanted to go north, maybe reach Columbia, or Morningside Heights, or what was left of it. I wasn't part of either plan. I wanted out. Not escape. Just out, into fresh air, above. I needed to see the sky again. Needed to know that buildings still stood, that roads still had meaning. I followed a maintenance shaft and climbed 7 flights up. Broke a padlock with a crowbar I'd found beside an old electrical panel. The door opened into the old switching control office near the northern end of Grand Central. The windows were smashed. The wind came in soft and cold. I stepped out and saw the city for the first time in 2 days. It was not gone. It was not saved. It was paused. Smoke curled from rooftops in slow spirals. No sirens. No horns. No planes overhead. No sound but the creak of old signs swaying in wind. A traffic light flicked between green and yellow with no cars beneath it. The Hudson shimmered dull in the distance, a metal skin reflecting the silence. I moved west on foot, past burned-out stores, past an empty firehouse with the doors open and no trucks inside, past a daycare where someone had written, "No one here," in black spray paint across the entire front window. The city had fallen into something deeper than silence. It had become suggestion. Shapes remained, buildings stood, sidewalks stretched on, but everything hinted at being only the outline of a memory, not abandoned, not destroyed, just drained. It felt like if I whispered too loud, it would all collapse like dust off an old blueprint. I reached Madison Square Park just after noon. The trees were still green, still trembling gently with the breeze, but the benches were broken. Someone had piled them into a makeshift wall, low and useless, a symbolic act more than anything else. Trash was scattered in corners, bags torn open, tin cans, papers stuck to the fence. A child's sneaker sat alone near the dog run, toes pointing toward the exit like whoever wore it had sprinted off and never looked back. In the center of the park, I found 2 bodies. Not infected, just people. A man and woman, maybe in their 30s. No signs of trauma, no blood, just lying next to each other, hands clasped. Their clothes were clean. The man had a Metro card still tucked into his shirt pocket. The woman wore a small chain with a ring on it around her neck. They hadn't been attacked. They had made a decision. That much was clear. I didn't stay long. Somewhere deep inside, I understood the need to go quiet, to stop moving, to accept that there was no help coming. But I wasn't ready to give up, not because I had hope in any real sense, but because my body wouldn't stop. My legs still worked. My stomach still growled. My mind still counted the steps between intersections. At 26th and 6th, I found a police barricade that had collapsed across the road. Beyond it was a sanitation truck turned sideways, cab door hanging open, dried blood on the rear bumper. I picked through it carefully. Inside the cab, the driver's wallet was still in the glove box. Eduardo Morales, 48 years old, sanitation department badge clipped to his ID. A family photo was folded behind his license. 2 kids, maybe 10 and 12, both wearing matching Mets jerseys. I kept the ID. I don't know why. Maybe to remember someone who'd tried to keep the city clean even as it bled out. By the time I reached the old post office by Penn Station, the sun had started to slip. It was hard to track time properly without the rhythms of trains or traffic or the usual tides of commuters. Everything came in long, drawn-out increments now. The city's breath was slow, shallow. But I knew I didn't want to be above ground when the light left. I found a service stairwell still open behind the post office loading bay. The building had been cleared, likely early on. No bodies inside, no infected either, just echoes and the dry scent of paper and dust. I moved quietly, methodically, the way I used to move through high-end buildings while making late-night deliveries. No sudden moves, no assumptions. On the 2nd floor, I discovered an old mail sorting room, conveyor belts, tilted chutes, piles of boxes that had never made it to their destinations. Some were still sealed. I opened 3 at random. One had shoes, another a blender. The third had canned goods, refried beans, carrots, pineapple chunks. The tape had begun to curl on the box, but the cans were intact. I packed them into my bag. I slept that night in the corner of the sorting room beneath a coat I found hanging from a mail cart. I used envelopes for a pillow. Before I closed my eyes, I jammed a broken mail bin against the door. I didn't expect it to stop anything strong, but if something came in, I wanted noise first. That's all you could ask for. Just enough time to react. The next morning, I found an old locker with batteries. Not many, a small handful, enough to power my flashlight a few more hours. There was a transistor radio inside too, dusty, the kind sold in the early 2000s with plastic knobs and telescoping antenna. I cleaned the contacts, loaded fresh batteries, and turned it on. At first, nothing but static. Then, faintly, a voice. Repeat. If you are hearing this broadcast, stay off the bridges. Do not attempt to cross the Hudson. Units have been redeployed to containment zones in central New Jersey. Brooklyn remains compromised. Staten Island is off-grid. It wasn't automated. The tone was too rough. It was a man's voice. Tired, low, but still precise. He didn't give a name. Just coordinates, warnings, and silence between segments. I couldn't tell if it was live, but it was something. The voice returned every 15 minutes. Same loop. On the third repeat, I caught a variation. Voluntary zone reassembly efforts continue near Van Cortlandt Park. Expect checkpoints and limited rations. If you can walk, walk north. Repeat, walk north. That became the plan. The voice didn't say salvation, didn't promise rescue. Just an effort, a location, something real, something physical. Not an idea, a place I could reach. I left the post office before noon. The city was changing again. By then, bodies were starting to disappear. Not all of them, just some. Piles that I'd seen the day before were gone when I passed again. Not burned, not moved by survivors. No signs of fire or drag. Just missing. Like someone, or something, had come through while I slept. I don't know if it was the infected. I don't know if they fed, or if they collected, or if they simply returned the dead to whatever system they obeyed. All I knew was that the cleanup had begun, and it wasn't us doing it. I made my way north, past Central Park. I saw deer moving through the trees near 86th Street. Wild, confused, but unbothered by me. Nature was filling the vacuum fast. A falcon circled above the Dakota building. Dogs barked from behind a glass wall on the 15th floor of a luxury high-rise. Trapped, pacing, unaware of how the world below had changed. At 110th Street, the remnants of a checkpoint blocked the road. Sandbags, wire coils. One flipped Humvee. A pile of green uniforms lay folded on a folding table, as if someone had taken off their role like a coat and walked away. I didn't see any weapons. Those had long since been scavenged. At 110 Street, the remnants of a checkpoint blocked the road. By nightfall, I'd made it to the base of Van Cortlandt Park. The air was different there. Thinner, cooler. The kind of air that used to mean the end of summer, the start of school, colder mornings, earlier nights. I heard movement before I saw anyone. Branches snapping gently. Not reckless, just the sound of presence. Human, but cautious. I waited near a collapsed signpost, watched for 20 minutes before someone revealed themselves. 3 of them, one with a white cloth tied around his arm, one with a crossbow slung over his shoulder, one holding a walkie that hissed with static. None of them looked surprised to see me. One of them even smiled. He said, "From the south." I nodded. He pointed toward a trail lined with stones. "Camp's that way. We have firewood, some meds. Not much else, but it's something." I followed. The camp was modest. 12 people, maybe 15. Tarps over old benches. Cook fires inside salvaged drums. A water filter rigged from scavenged tubing. A few solar panels tilted toward the fading sun. They asked no questions. Didn't demand anything. Just offered a bowl of rice and beans and a place near the edge of the camp to roll out my coat. That night, as I lay beneath a pine tree, I stared at the stars for the first time in days. Real sky, cold air, distant dog barks in the hills. Someone a few feet away was humming. No words, just a tune. I didn't know what tomorrow would be, but I knew what it wouldn't be. Panic, fleeing, running blindly. I had a direction now, a place to work from. Survival wasn't an instinct anymore. It was a practice, and I was going to keep practicing, because even if the city never came back, even if the world outside stayed fractured and slow and filled with things that used to be people, I was still here, still moving, still learning the rhythm of what was left. There's no reset button, no cure coming, no miracle, but there's time, and sometimes time is enough. So I'll keep going, because I'm a cyclist, and all I've ever done is move forward. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.